Hi, everybody. How's the conference going so far? Let's first off give it up for the speakers beforehand. Let's start there. Are we good on slides? There might be a couple technical difficulties. That's kind of my forte. I wanted to start off by saying this is actually a really special session for me, of course, because of you guys and the content's really near and dear to my heart. But this is especially special for me because my grandmother, mom, aunt, and all of my grandmother's friends are here. So let's give a big Sales Dev welcome. So it's going to be a little not normal for me, but I'm going to try and tighten up the swear words during this session, if that's okay, because I don't want to end up putting in the $20 bill jar. It went from 25 cents to $20 bill with inflation for swears. So I'm going to try and stay away from them. Are we good on slides?
I have no idea what's happening with this computer right now. But I'm glad it's you and not somebody else.
Okay, great. Let's just go. We'll go rogue, and I'll try to go from memory if that's okay. Okay, well, as an icebreaker, I am known for not knowing what to say right off the beginning. There you go. I'm known for not knowing what to say typically, but just especially right at the beginning. So as an icebreaker, people ask me a lot about personal information, about me. If you want to know more about my career, it's kind of boring, but go to LinkedIn. If you want to know about my personal life, I will give out one tidbit. I typically pitch my content to my fish Wolfgang at home on Friday nights. So I'd sit there and I would pitch all this content to him. And actually 3 weeks ago, my little fish Wolfgang passed away. I know, it was super sad. I feel like he had just heard enough of the content, so he decided to put the X himself. At any rate, I bought a new fish, and so today I wanted to name him. So we have 4 different names, and this might affect the career trajectory of me and of sales development. So this is really important stuff, people. So the 4 names that I came up with, number 1 is Barnaby. My favorite book is Barnaby Rudge by Charles Dickens. The second name is Bruce the Goose. The third name is Tootsie. And the 4th name is Elton John. So why don't we start with Barnaby, and let's just do you guys want to do clap or show of hands? You want to do clap? Okay, so let's start with Barnaby. So who wants to name the fish Barnaby? All right, who thinks Tootsie is the name? All right, what about Bruce the Goose? And lastly, Elton John. So I actually preemptively changed my phone dialer to Rocket Man because I was hoping that you chose Elton John. So good pick. So that is the new name of my fish. As far as the content, let's get to it because I'm going to go through a lot. I have typically put this into an hour-and-a-half format, and I'm going to try and get it down to 20. So I'm not going to worry about digestibility if that's okay. And let's just sprint through the content. So when it comes to personalizing at scale, there's usually 2 camps in the sales dev industry that I've seen in the past. There's either your camp of followers that says, I want to personalize at scale, but I can't because I can't maintain consistency of the messaging. I don't know what my SDRs are saying on the phone, but personalization is great, but I just simply can't do it because I want to get out a huge volume of calls and of emails. Then there's the other camp that says personalization, I would do mass blast, the volume's great, and the consistency is great, but it's just not working on my prospects anymore. So by a show of hands, let's start here. How many people in this room typically respond to mass blast, unpersonalized messages sent to them by taking a meeting? Okay.
I would as you.
So we got, thank you. So we've got 1. Okay, who in here in the room thinks that your prospects are different than you in that regard? Okay, so now we have the problem. The problem is that mass blast just isn't working on us anymore. It's not working for us and it's not working on us. So today, I wanted to uncrack how to personalize at scale by first adding a structure to how to tease out a premise of outreach, then transitioning over to how to maintain consistency among your emails with doing it, then transition to how to do it in your calls, and then we'll finish off with how to scale it with sales engagement. So I picked Outreach as my vendor today, so you'll see snapshots in how to scale it within Outreach, but you can do it in InsideSales.com, and I'm assuming a couple of the other sales engagement vendors. So let's first talk about picking out a premise. So I basically made an exhaustive list of all the premises that you could pick whenever it comes to personalizing. So typically companies see personalization as you're personalizing on 3 different buckets, either a demographic principle. So demographic is anything in the B2C predilection, like someone's age, someone's gender, someone's income, someone's profession, or someone's education background. So typically they zero in on profession and say like this person is in sales, for instance. The second principle that they usually personalize on or see personalization as is on a firmographic principle. So company size, industry segment, vertical, product sophistication are typically what we see. And then we say, okay, personalizing means case studies that is relevant to someone in terms of their vertical. The third is technographic. People see personalizing as technographic, of what kind of tech stack do they typically have, who does it integrate with, and how can I personalize my messaging based on that. But the fourth sneaky graphic is psychographic. Psychographic principles is anything that someone believes, anything that someone is interested in, anything with someone that resonates at their core. So my theory and hypothesis was, what if we interwove psychographic principles? I think if I talk to someone, for instance, with Gary Vee, Gary Vee has a demographic principle that he didn't go to college. That's his educational background. He has a psychographic principle that he believes that you don't have to have the typical, atypical education background to be successful. So when you see him on LinkedIn, that's what you see him posting about, is he's talking about all of how you don't have to have an education background to be successful. So I divided it into the following 7 buckets. We'll start with the first 5, and then we'll transition to what I call postbound premises. The first kind of bucket that you can personalize on is self-authored content. By the way, I'm going to start in terms of potency down to what I've seen doesn't have the highest trigger rate in A/B test. The first bucket is going to be self-authored content. This is anything that your prospect wrote, authored, maybe they wrote an article, or they were a part of a webinar, or they made a post on LinkedIn. So that's the highest potency bucket rate. The second bucket is going to be engaged content. This is something that they engaged with but didn't author themselves. So for instance, if someone else wrote a post and they commented on it, liked it, or shared it. Not as potent as self-authored, but still pretty potent. The third bucket is self-attributed traits. This is anything in their profile line, their headline, or their company line. So, we'll all see on LinkedIn of the funny thing is it's always authored by that actual person. They're like, Becca's a badass executor in scaling teams. She specializes in whatever hypergrowth within sales teams and training. But that is probably my favorite bucket because you basically are positioning back to your prospect that either they care about what you're talking about or they weren't telling the truth on their profile line. So that's the third bucket, is anything that they talked about themselves within their profile. The fourth bucket is going to be what I affectionately call the junk drawer. So this is anything, schools attended, personal interests, hobbies. We'll talk about the hook later, but I'd say the one rule of engagement here is that whatever that you pick, you have to then relate to what your company does. So I've seen a lot of 10-80-10 outreach of hey, Becc, I noticed that you went to Texas A&M. Awesome. Whoever else did. There you go. Hey, Becc, I noticed you went to Texas A&M. We over here at Drift, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, wait, I did go to Texas A&M. Me and 50,000 other people every single calendar year, including that guy. What's your point? So the rule of engagement I always outline is if you're going to talk about a personal interest, if you're going to talk about my new fish, Elton John, you better be able to relate what your product does in terms of my fish. So that's kind of the rule and the parameter that I put around that. And then the last bucket of with the least amount of potency is if you talk about their company. And the reason being that it's less potency is because it's firmographic only. So M&A, posts, blogs, hiring, website language. My biggest tip here would be the more detailed but the more brief that you can be, the better. So the difference between saying, because in sales development we've wanted to mask that volume of outreach is personalized, you'll see a lot of emails that are blasted out that say hi blank, I noticed that your company is growing, or my CEO sent me your way, or on and on and on. And so we aren't buying it anymore in the buying community. So you have to include some kind of detail that basically puts you in a group that your prospect knows that you personalize. So instead of saying, hi, Blake, I noticed that your company is growing. Hi, Blake, reason for my outreach is your company is growing by 63% in the last 6 months, and you just added 17 reps on your sales team. So the difference between those is one tells your prospect that you were mass blasting, and the other says that you were personalizing. So the latter two buckets are what I call postbound premises. So these, half of them, a postbound premise is anything that's not truly inbound, like a demo request, and not truly outbound because they know who your company is. So like event leads, like this one, webinar leads, ebook downloads, resource downloads. Those are all your postbound leads. Some that you can mention, some I would suggest not mentioning, like company funding. I would not suggest reaching out to your prospect and saying, hey, I noticed that you just raised a lot of money. Do you want to buy my stuff because you have cash? So I see it a lot in the outreach community, but these are the postbound premises, and how you can pair these together to have a reason for outreach is if you have a postbound premise, my suggestion here is if someone downloaded your content and they didn't hit request a demo, it's because of a reason. They just wanted your content. So I would say, hi, Eric, I noticed that you downloaded, our ebook on personalization at scale, but more importantly, I saw this article that you wrote on LinkedIn and I just, couldn't stop reading. So you want to transition to, I noticed that you did this action that has something to do with my company, but more importantly, let's talk about you. I don't want to talk about me. I want to talk about you. So flip the script when it comes down to it. It's going from mass blast to personalization, and it's flipping all about your company to all about your prospect. I would suggest if you're going to have aggression, don't have aggression on volume. Have aggression where it's appropriate. Know your buyer to the nth degree. Know what your buyer does. Know what their day-to-day looks like. Know every single thing about them. So if you get live with them, they're impressed because you know all of this data concerning who they are. If you don't have a postbound premise, I would suggest doing a bucket premise summary and then one line in specific. So, hi, Becc, I noticed that you did a webinar on personalization at scale. One line that really stood out to me is, if you're going to be aggressive about knowing your buyer. So now we know how to pick out a premise. Let's talk about how to put it into email. When it comes to emails, I follow what's called the Chuck Jones philosophy. Chuck Jones is basically the creator of Acme and animation rules. So he wrote Wile E. Coyote, Roadrunner, etc. When he was younger, Chuck Jones was actually in Spokane, Washington, and his dad moved him down to Los Angeles. He was an unsuccessful businessman, and every single time that he changed companies, he would get new letterhead with the company name, and he would get pencils with the company name on there. When he got fired, he'd hand them to Chuck Jones, and he said, just start drawing. Chuck Jones did upwards of 200,000 drawings in his career, and when it came down to Wile E. Coyote, after 100,000 drawings, he said that he started to create the rules of animation over the actual drawings themselves. So like when you create a head, it should look like this. When you create an animal into a character, the rules are you should look like this. So when it comes to emailing, I would suggest the same thing. If I always want to hoard the creative talent of, like Eric was a great example. He had a lot of ideas, and I said, hey, here are the rules around what you want to say, but when it came down to everything that Eric was saying, he gave me credit, but I'd give it back to him. I gave him some rules, but he executed the actual idea. So when it comes to an email, the rules of engagement that I put are this. So the first line should be the longest line. Google did a study on how you read emails. You start at 2 o'clock and you go clockwise. So basically what that tells you is that your prospects are going to read the end of your first line first. They're going to loop around to the end of your CTA. They're then going to loop around to the beginning of your CTA, and they're going to finish with what your company does in the middle. So actually the least valuable real estate to you as a rep is what you do as a company. It's odd, but they want to know who you are and what you want before they even want to talk about what you do. So the premise line I would suggest being the longest line and all about the prospect. The body line I would suggest being the middle, medium amount of length and all about what you can do them in terms of value prop. So instead of talking about how you do what you do, I would talk to the person in terms of buyer persona and the value or the pain that you alleviate for them or the value you offer to them. And then the last line is a CTA, and I would suggest being the shortest line. So your personalization is going to come into your premise line when you talk right off the bat all about your prospect. The reason for my outreach is I saw your LinkedIn article, I couldn't get enough. One line that stood out to me was when it comes down to scaling teams, it's all about having great conversations. It's a great example. In the background for the rest of the message, I have what's called the 7 pillars of attractive messaging. I start with pillars that I see people do not so well down to what I see them do well. The first pillar is prospect-centric, talk all about your buyer. Second is pain-centric, talk all about the pains you alleviate over the features and the wonderful things, all of the benefit that you drive. The third is pride aversive. If I were to point to anything in my outreach that had caused the highest trigger rate, it would be pride aversion. So you were to meet someone on a date, they were to spend the first 30 minutes talking all about how great they are. I'm crushing it at my job, blah, blah, blah. My grandmother showed up for my conference. Like I'm killing it at the gym, I have a lot of money. After that 30 minutes, how would you guys feel about that person? Not interested, why not? Yeah, there's no empathy in that. So we, oddly enough, want to build rapport with our buyer by talking well of ourselves. I would build rapport with my buyer by adding as much value as you can to them. And then there's that instinctual rapport. So instead of talking about how you're the number one, everyone says they're the number one. We're the number one blank. We have awesome customers and they're awesome because they work with me. Everyone seems to work with LinkedIn. We work with LinkedIn, SAP Concur, Palo Alto Networks, on and on and on. Instead of talking about all the great things that you do, make your buyer the hero. So there's 2 pieces to it. I can't spend much time here, but part of it is being all about the fandom of your prospect. I remember I met, Inside Sales is here, right? InsideSales.com, somewhere in the room. Anyway, I met Gabe Larson, their VP of Marketing, and he said, hey, it's so nice to meet you. I think we're connected on LinkedIn. I was like, let me tell you the top 3 blogs that you've done that have changed my career. Blah, 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 blah. Me and Gabe have a relationship now. And the reason is I knew everything about him walking in that room. So I'm going to be aggressive in terms of knowing who every single prospect is. The other piece is I would take accountability for your lackluster outreach. I know it sounds crazy. I had a rep once that basically went through a call, and I was like, hey, didn't work out. I was like, why'd that call go wrong? He was like, I don't know, I blacked out somewhere in the middle. It's like, I think I feature dumped. I started talking all about, how great we are. I said, cool, call your prospect back and tell him that. I can't do that. I said, you work for me, you can. Tell him that you weren't expecting him to pick up, and that he picked up and you freaked out and you feature dumped, and being a sales effectiveness platform, you should know better. And that with some permission from him, you like another shot to earn some of his time. Called back, did it, closed the deal. So I'd say, our prospects aren't not responding to us because they're bad people. They're not responding to us because we didn't drive enough value. Take accountability for it. You'd be surprised. I think it enters a degree of humanity and makes you a real person on the other side of the line. And then that's all the 7 things to do. Let's talk about the things not to do. Very briefly, number 1, being too casual or too silly, opening with, hey, giving them the list of you must have been swallowed by a shark, or don't value data, or you just don't like your team. Sending over gifts to your prospect, big no-no. Number 2, wasted texts. I know you're busy, but I'm circling back. I wanted to follow up here, wanted to bump this to the top of your inbox. Any thoughts? If you aren't adding any value, if you could strike through the line that you just sent over and have the same exact email, I'd suggest doing it. The third principle, being the authority over the prospect. Richard Harris talked all about ego states. I think that was great. You have child ego state, adult ego state, you have parent ego state. When it comes down to child ego state, you have 2. He mentioned you have natural, which think like, I love bubbles, I'm impressed by small things, and you have adaptive, which is your rebellious side. Ripping cigarettes underneath the bleachers kind of feel. And so if you enact, if you're the authority over your prospect and you say, let me know, you go into parent ego state and you trigger them into child ego state, and basically they want to instinctually rebel against you. You go into child ego state. If you want your boss not to do something, tell him it's not fair. And they'll say, I'm the parent, so I instinctually want to say no to you, and I don't want to put you into a demo. The fourth one, questioning the prospect's authority. I wouldn't suggest asking if they're the decision maker. If they are, they're like, so what? I am, but so what? If they aren't, they feel invalidated. The fifth, making your prospect feel not okay by mudslinging against competitors. What Sarah says about Sally says more about Sarah than Sally. It's my suggestion. 6, making your prospect feel stupid. Asking them, does that make any sense? Good way to say that is, am I making any sense? Put the onus on you to communicate versus them to understand. And the 7th, I think we covered it heavily, but glorifying yourself. Talk all about how great they are instead of yourself. So now let's go into cold calls, and then we'll briefly hit on how to scale it. How much time we have left? 5 minutes. Okay, we're going to go quick. Where I'm personalizing is right off the bat, hey, this is Becc calling on a recorded line with Chorus. How have you been? They're like, great. I'm like, good, great to hear that. Hey, the reason for my outreach is, and that's where I'm personalizing. So again, you go into either giving a bucket premise and then one line that stood out to you, or if you have a postbound reason. Again, I'm not going for digestibility here. If you have a postbound reason, I'd say, hey, I noticed that you went to the Sales Development Conference. More importantly, I saw that you were part of this webinar and it really stood out to me, so I was curious to know if you've come across Chorus before. So that's where I personalize within a call, and then they say, like, no, I haven't come across Chorus, and I go into a good old Sandler upfront contract. How about this? You give me the next 30 seconds. There's 4 pieces to an upfront contract. There's commitment, agenda, there's outcome, and then there's consent. So it looks like this. How about this? You give me the next 30 seconds to give you my best dog and pony show on who Chorus is and why I thought we might be a good fit for you. And at the end of that 30 seconds, you can tell me whether it makes sense to continue the conversation from there. That fair? They say fair. So at that point, you're on. You got 30 seconds. I have like 98% conversion at that point in the funnel. And where I personalize, again, is on the back end. So like I mentioned, I saw that you wrote this article on scaling effective teams. At the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong, VPs of business development care about meetings. So we typically work, and I go into describing my typical buyer. We typically work with VPs of biz dev who want to get more meetings but don't know what their reps are saying wrong on the phone. Or they want to win more competitive meetings, but they don't know what exact verbiage their reps are saying to make them switch from you and land in the laps of your competitor at the last minute. So where I'm personalizing, again, is right off the bat, the reason for my outreach. At that point, if they ask me, like, you're Becc with Chorus with who? I say, that's a great question. Reason for my outreach is back into the script. I call you, you're on my time. I called you. So I get to that reason for outreach. I don't go into what Chorus does. I get them back into my personalization, because I just did what most SDRs don't do, is I personalize based on you, and I want them to know that. In terms of how to scale it, let's talk about how to scale it. The first question that I ask most SDRs is, what do you want to scale? I have a feeling that we want to scale meetings and results, but somewhere in there we got lost and decided to scale volume. So I'd be all focused on the results. So most of the teams that I've worked with, I've at minimum 2x their numbers, maximum 4x their numbers by switching to all personalization. Trish Bertuzzi cut a report with Bridge Group that basically said the average amount of dials an SDR makes nowadays is 47 per day. So I partnered with Outreach, and I basically built in all these personalization settings into their custom fields. If you're using Outreach, then you can do it by going to their custom fields, build in everything they could personalize on. If you're using InsideSales.com, wait 2 weeks, and I'm going to do a webinar on building it in with them. But I got my reps to 25 emails per day and 50 calls per day, all completely personalized, leveraging sales engagement. Within Outreach, every single time that my person calls, I've seen, a lot of reps, if they personalize, they put it all into some massive Google sheet. Then the person picks up and they're all like scrambling, like, oh, where's that personalization? Where is it? So I basically built it in at the prospect level. You can contact your CSM on how to do this, but now every single time I use Scott Barker in this instance, he's over with Outreach. Every single time I call Scott, the personalized premise pops to the top of the sheet. In terms of sequencing, I guess my graphic's not deciding to pull up. In terms of sequencing, I build sequences that are called shell sequences. It basically dictates the type of outreach that they're doing, but not the actual text itself. More aggressive on the back end, exponentially. I'd be cool up front, day 1, day 8, day 14, day 17, 18, 19, 20, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, this person's not going to go away. The last step to personalization, you're going to think I'm out of my mind. I block my reps from reaching out unless they personalize. We're hiring, by the way, if you want to work for Fun Girl over here. But within outreach, if they haven't filled in enough personalized fields, then basically they cannot call my prospects. So in summary, I know that personalization's tough. I know that we don't feel like there's a real structure around it, but I think we have a great opportunity here. We have an opportunity to bring integrity back to sales. We have the opportunity to really make sure we know our buyer and to drive our quota attainment as a result. So that's it. Thanks everyone for coming. If you want to know more, and there's an extended version, if you want the slides,
wait, Becc, can I level with you? This is the thing. Like, I think this information is so imperative, and I know how engaged the audience was. So you have run a few minutes over, but how about this? You give a shout out to your LinkedIn and or your email.
Yes.
And then you can connect with every single person here who wants to further their conversation. And then you, oh my gosh, I'm like on the spot right now.
Okay, so my email, if you want the slides, if you want the slides or the deck for today, you can email me at becc.holland@chorus.ai. I would suggest following Chorus on LinkedIn if you want to see any content or content like this, because we're going to be ripping a lot of videos on how to do it over email and go more in depth in 20 minutes.
Amazing, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.